So what we're going to be talking about today is the difficulty of scaling DevOps, or the simplicity, depending on the actual feedback we get from people and stories from the field. What is it like scaling from small pockets of success to large organizations? I think this is something we've seen in the DevOps report that we've been doing with DORA and with Nicole over the years, that this has been the big challenge for many organizations. It's pretty easy to get a small team functional. Like, we know what needs to be done. Let's work in an agile way, let's ticket all our work, let's do CI, let's deploy a lot of automation. But breaking down the silos across organizations can be a lot more challenging, and trying to work out how to scale those practices is really, really difficult. So I should have done this first, but I'm Nigel Kirsten. I'm Chief Technical Strategist at Puppet. Basically been part of the furniture there for a pretty long time. And now I will get everyone on the panel to introduce themselves.
I'm Tricia Burke, and I'm the Vice President of Production Operations at Diligent.
My name is Trigg Bowlin. I'm a Technology Director and Tribe Leader at Fannie Mae.
I'm Nicole Forsgren. I'm CEO and Chief Scientist at DORA.
So this is who we've got on the panel. So I'm going to kick it off with a couple of questions. But again, anything that anyone wants to bring up, please grab our attention, and we'll try and make this as interactive as possible. So one of the questions I really wanted to ask everyone was, I'm often hearing, particularly from people in large organizations, that there's a sort of gap in hypocrisy between senior leaders going, we are so DevOps, we're so part of the future, this is all the stuff we're doing, and people on the ground are going, well, things are actually kind of a little bit crap and dysfunctional here still. I sort of wanted to get everyone's thoughts on that. Like, if you feel like, I think this is one of the things we need to overcome to stop just being a hype cycle and to actually sort of make progress in the industry. And I know it's difficult. I don't want to get everyone to just bring out their dirty laundry.
Can I start with some data?
Sure.
So Rob Stroud kicked us off this morning, and Forrester has this fantastic report that is, the dangerous disconnect. Depending on where you sort of sit in an organization, you end up having a very different view, and executives end up drastically overestimating your DevOps maturity and your DevOps transformation, like drastically overestimating. So, depending on who you ask, you're going to end up getting a very, very different answer. And if you ask the doers, you'll get sort of real life. And you end up asking an executive, you'll get what they might think is real life, but is very different and a very strong overestimation.
So I know this is a challenge I get as managing people, like actually getting an accurate signal from your teams as to how things are going.
We definitely have this problem, right? I think it becomes apparent whenever I think maybe after the first year or so of trying to do this conversion, where you have a lot of these big, you start talking about the return on investment that you had promised everybody a year before, and you start saying, so there's still a little bit of a gap there, and trying to really dig into what that is. And actually, what we started to really, what we've been struggling with, and I think we've made some success in, is coming up with ways to really show empirical data rather than just sound bites from. Because certainly people like to champion their teams and they talk a really good game, but we've been really leveraging things like Puppet and things like Jenkins to actually pull in the raw data, right? So if you have fully adopted CI/CD, but you're only committing code like once a month, then you're not doing CI/CD, right? So what we've tried to do is, instead of creating a big dashboard where you kind of put everybody on report, we kind of go behind the scenes and gather that data, and then do coaching engagements with different development teams to make sure that they understand what they could be doing better and understand why they're not fully there yet. But I think, it's tough to have that conversation, because you certainly don't want to get into a situation where you put people on the defensive, right? And there's certainly a lot of upper-level executives that they've been bragging about how great their teams are, and you can't really go back and say, well, you guys haven't actually been doing this. Like, they've been telling you a good story, but it's not happening yet. So the key is, I think, giving people the ability to understand what are those hurdles at getting past the crappy parts, right, and really adopting it.
I think the other thing you need to consider, though, is that it all goes in stages, right? And DevOps means a little bit something different to every organization, and so I think there are definitely some tenets of it that are pretty standard in terms of continuous integration and continuous delivery. But I think people also kind of need to give themselves a little bit of a break and say, okay, right, yes, we're not perfect, but we're moving in the right direction, right? We're pushing the ball forward. We're meeting with the teams and talking with the teams about how they can get better.
Yeah, are you following the intent of the culture change, or is it a letter of the law kind of challenge, right? And yeah, we saw a lot of big pushback initially, and I suspect a lot of teams do this, where you'll have people come in with very, very specific ideas about what defines DevOps and what defines Agile, right? And you get there's probably one end of the spectrum, whereas you have to follow every ceremony and you must live and die by the Scrum. And then at the other end of it, you've got kind of we're not going to document anything, and we'll just keep doing what we were doing before, and we'll deliver software at some point. But I think as long as people start to understand what that goal is, and you have a culture of kind of continuous improvement, whether or not wherever you are on that spectrum, if you start to let people identify problems and then give them the bandwidth to solve them, then I think you're on the right track.
I think you two are both sort of hitting on an important point, which is it's the trend line that matters.
Right.
Yeah.
And ultimately, so long as things are progressing and getting better, which isn't always easy to perceive when you're on the ground.
Yeah, I think there's an assumption that it's a specific journey, right? It's going to take 1 year, and we're going to convert everybody to DevOps, and we're going to adopt all the tools, and it's not. What you find out is that it's just. Once you start on that path, you go, it's not really point A to B, it's point A to infinity, right? You're going to always be on that journey, and that actually it's a really good thing, because it gives you the flexibility to always improve, and there's always room for improvement because of that.
And I love kind of those 2 points. Can I just dive in?
Go for it.
Maturity models are for chumps. It's totally fine. Anyone who really sort of takes on this idea or embarks on a journey thinking that we're going to have a maturity model and we're all going to go after, we're at level 1, we're going to get to level 5. I have serious concerns for that. And here's sort of why, right? Because it's a direction and not a destination, and it needs to be sort of 1 to infinity. And here's why, because I'm the lead investigator on the State of DevOps report. We've worked together over this for several years. Anytime we've defined and identified what's low, medium, and high performance, I have not taken an a priori approach, which means I just walk into it blind every year and say dear data, tell me what this looks like. And I do this because I'm super curious to see what the industry is doing. And what the industry is doing is year over year, it's getting drastically better. If I walked into it in 2014, which is the first year I was involved, and I said, okay, 2014, here's the data, and here's a maturity model. 2015, that maturity model was out of date. 2016, the maturity model again was out of date, maturity model, right? 2017, it again was out of date. So if we take a maturity model approach, it will forever, first problem, it will forever be out of date. And the best, most innovative organizations know this. And they don't know this in a way that is terrifying and panicking, and we're always racing behind, but it's an innovative, exciting thing that drives us to do better. Point number 2, it's not a lockstep process, right? We always have slightly different things, right? If we introduce ourselves to someone next to us, say hi. Take a second, say hi. Thanks. Even if you're in the same organization, I will bet that your configuration, your team, your infrastructure, your something looks a little bit different. Which means if you walk up to me later and say, dear Nicole, what should I start on? Your answer is going to be different. So someone's level 1, someone's level 2, someone's level 3, someone's level 4 is never going to be the exact same thing. So maturity model fails there too. Also, the thing that concerns me the very, very most, so I probably shouldn't have said 3, except that it's the most important.
The best rule of public speaking, though, is you just say you're going to list n number of things and no one ever keeps track.
It's perfect. Let's say that I come up with the most perfect maturity model that has 5 levels, and so we decide that we want to get to level 5. Once you hit level 5, resources disappear. Whether it's money, or time, or resources, or, God forbid, attention. Someone's attention goes away. What happens when someone's attention goes away and they decide that your technology transformation is no longer important because you have reached level 5? We're all effed. right? And so instead what we need to do is we all need to decide right now, CI needs to get better. Next, test automation needs to get better. Next, our configuration management is not a bottleneck. Test automation needs to get better. Oh, test automation got better. Okay, now configuration management is our bottleneck. Oh, okay, now test automation is the bottleneck again. Okay, now CD is the bottleneck again. We always need to get better, and not because we're always behind, but because we always have this amazing opportunity to deliver value and make things better.
So I think to summarize that really quickly, it's that maturity
'Cause I
models
am
are
not
stupid.
fast.
Maturity models are stupid, but you should have goals of maturing.
It's a huge
Yes.
it's a huge red flag whenever you hear a program executive say, "Can we just get to level 4 so we can move on and do something else?" Right? Like because that implies that they don't really understand what the value proposition is of doing DevOps or doing Agile. Right? The value proposition is being on that journey, because it means you're going to be a higher performing team. You're going to always have an eye out for improvement, and I think you're going to start to see a much greater return on the investment if you treat it like a
checkbox.
like a mandatory upgrade list, right? Or something just to
Dungeons and
something to check
Dragons
the box,
character.
right? You're never going to get there, right? And people will lie to you to make you feel good about being there, right? Are you doing this? Yeah, we're level 4. Don't worry about it, right?
Well, or you're lying to other people.
Right.
It's basically because you're just telling people what they want to hear,
Right.
essentially.
There's a hand.
Hi. So I'm just a low-level engineer.
Woo!
And I believe what you say.
Just a- no,
How would you
only a-
suggest? How do you suggest I get people in these other levels that you brought up on board with the direction instead of the destination?
So this is really very similar to the question I was actually about to ask, which is, you've got the question from sort of the people on the coalface, the practitioners, like how do you affect change moving up? But I have the same question for you two, which is, you have senior management you're having to manage up to as well as teams below. And what is it like to sort of affect change all the way up through? And how do you do it?
Well, I mean,
Please in 10 seconds in a repeatable
Yes.
way that everyone in this room
Yeah, right.
should.
Tweetable only.
Yeah, that's right. I think you have to know who your audience is, right? You have to play to your audience, basically, right? You have to play up to senior management on all kind of like return on investment and all of those things, right? And then you have to play down, and I don't mean down because these people are below you, but you have to play to the folks who report up into you because there's advantages for them as well, right? It's going to make their lives better. It's going to make them feel more successful in their work. And I think that, if I tell my boss that we need to do this because it's going to make my staff feel more successful, he's going to be like, great. But if I tell my boss that we should do this because we're going to deliver software faster, right, and be more efficient in the way that we operate, like that appeals to him. So.
Yeah, I don't know if I've got a really easy bullet point. It's really easy to lose credibility with the people that work for you,
Yes.
right? If they can tell that you have to BS all of your leaders, then they're not. I don't think they're going to feel really good about what they're doing, right? So it's tough. I think that one, you have to treat your leadership like they're as intelligent as they actually are, right? I mean, there's a reason that typically senior executives are senior executives. It's not because, well, maybe it's because they were just really good at sales, but it could also, it's probably also because they're really smart people and they get it if you can put it into their words, right? If you can help them understand what the value proposition is. And I think that, and this is tough at organizations that are not software houses, right? I mean, I work for a company whose product is not software, right? Yeah. Our goal is to monetize the mortgage market. So being able to describe how DevOps or how Agile is able to improve the company's bottom line is critical. And if you can put it in terms of saying, yeah, you know what? Instead of having expenses for 9 months before you can reap the benefit of that project, you're going to get a small amount of value incrementally from now until the full product goes live, right? So you're going to start off in the green after the first 2 weeks instead of starting off in the red for the first 9 months. And being able to draw those conclusions on what you're trying to change, I think is really powerful.
So how do we package that up for the people on the ground? Like if you haven't got, I'm assuming you haven't yet got buy-in from your direct managers and managers above, like how do we activate those people to be change agents, for want of a
You mean the people above or the
people
on the
below?
ground,
Like,
right?
how do we give them advice in their organizations?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think the way that we've done it is we've tried to, again, show those small successes, right? So empowering people to do as much as possible within the kind of their scope of influence. And I probably ought to reach out to one of my coworkers, Trent, who's out there, who's really pioneered Puppet, especially at Fannie Mae. And the way that they were successful, the way his team was successful, was really, it's showing people what value is, right? So going out there and doing, not just talking about it, right? So if you can, hopefully you've got a leader that's willing to trust you for 2 weeks or for 6 weeks to go out there and actually produce something, and then demonstrate that value. It's tremendously powerful. The ability to have a demo and do demos on a regular basis rather than just talk about it is a huge benefit.
I think there's one little bit of advice I would give, which is I think one of the best things about the DevOps movement for practitioners has been caring about what the business is there to deliver. Like, your job's not just to run servers anymore. It's not just to install software. It's to deliver some kind of value to the business. And I think having to understand that as a practitioner on the ground, if you start to understand what's my boss's job, my boss's job should be to deliver some kind of part of the value chain for the business. What's their boss's job? And start sort of mapping that out in your head and going, what can I do that actually makes my boss's job better? And I guess I'm somewhat maybe naive, optimistic about people, but I feel like if you go, I've just made your job easier to someone, they will let you keep on doing that. Generally.
But I think the point is get a small win. Yeah. Right? The point is do something small and show everyone what it can do. And I think that's the way, that's kind of where we saw a lot of success, right? We didn't do that initially. We tried to do something huge and then realized that it was going to take a lot longer than we thought. But when we sort of took a step back and got a small win, it really sort of got everybody on the same page in terms of what our capabilities were.
And I think that's pretty common. I think, especially if you're in a large scale enterprise, right? You're in a bank or an insurance company or some other product company that, again, they've probably traditionally seen technology always as an expense and not a benefit to the company, right? It's always that thing that cost me a lot of money that, with all the servers. If you can help show how that tie the value add there to the bottom line, right? It makes a big difference. But they always look at things and say, well, we should try to do it all at once. And if you try to do it all at once, you're typically going to fail the first time out, right? And you've got to scale back and have some small successes first.
So one of the questions I had that came to mind thinking about this topic was, if we're talking about how do we scale DevOps from small pockets of success to the organization, are there any kind of organizational or team structures that make that better or worse? If you could start again, if you could blow up your whole organization.
So we've been blowing up our organization for the 3 years that I've been there.
Okay. Has it made any difference?
It does make a difference. I almost think the act of reorganizing is as important as what the end result is. So we just went through a big process of going, and we visited Spotify, and we talked to all these engineers and said, hey, why don't we try to adopt the Spotify model? So if you saw Tribe Leader as one of my titles,
Do you want to describe Spotify for those who don't know?
So for those of you that, if you've been living in a hole for a while, Spotify is a streaming music company. Yes, but in terms of what Spotify's model is,
Tell me more. This sounds amazing.
Spotify decided to create a model where they have it broken up into tribes and squads and chapters and guilds. And if you're into D&D, maybe that makes a lot of sense to you. And if not, then you just kind of have to see it in action. But effectively, you have these tribes that are focused on specific products. And then often within a tribe, you're broken down into different squads, which are delivering either features or they're responsible for specific kind of sub-functions within that product. Each one is, in theory, fully independent and able to deliver that product without necessarily having to bring in another tribe. And then we have chapters, which tend to be things like, oh, you're a software developer, or you're a project manager, or you're a scrum master, right? And so you have these kind of chapters that are kind of loose non-hierarchical organizations that cross the tribe, right? And then you'll have guilds, which tend to be kind of specialized groups that are self-forming. So you would have a guild on, maybe you have a guild on software quality for Java, right? And or testing with JUnit, or there are maybe Sauce Labs, or some, there are going to be these guilds that tend to form and fall apart based on a specific interest or effort that's ongoing. Does that do what you ask? Okay.
Sorry, I've been on a few panels where someone says something and then they'll like pull us aside later and say, I have no idea what the Spotify model is.
There are some great blog posts. So Spotify does have a publicly accessible blog where they talk about their model. I think it's probably even changed from that since we last visited. But again, I think that, so organizationally, and to get back to the root of the question, breaking up hierarchies, I think, is really important to change, because one of the things that makes it very hard to move forward are entrenched interests and people trying to kind of hold on to the fiefdoms and the kingdoms that they've spent a lot of time politically creating. And often that gives teams the wrong incentive to change. So just the act of simply kind of getting everybody to stand up and move around the room and meet new people and kind of change the tables that they're at, so to speak, right, is really powerful, because it forces people to change. So I'm a fan of organizational change because I think that disruption helps people focus on the product and not the politics.
No, I think that's true. And like, there's similar data around being a service owner as well. I remember when I was at Google, there was really strong data showing that if you were responsible for running a service, after 18 months, improvements pretty much just trailed off. But in the first 6 months of taking on a service, the quality bar went way, way up, and new features appeared. And just by shuffling people around, I think it's probably similar with jobs.
And I think that certainly the challenge there, and you guys, I don't know, I'm kind of monopolizing the conversation here, but the challenge certainly is, my mic's just going to go mute. The challenge is certainly people also kind of don't like change, right? So you have to balance the organizational shift with the fact that people are comfortable doing the thing that they've always been doing, right? Especially in an organization that has a lot of longevity. People may have been doing the same job for 15, 20 years, and having them change that is tough, because they probably get most of the stuff done because of the relationships they've built, not because that's the way humans are, right? We build relationships.
Change is stressful, and your job's a big part of your life, and we don't want to stress everyone out. What about Trish? What's your organizational structure been like as far as helping or impeding? We can turn off recording if you want.
Yeah, no. About 18 months ago, I went to my boss and I said, we should do service reliability engineering. This is such a great idea. This is going to revolutionize the way we're working. And he was like, yeah, that's a great idea. Never going to happen. And I was like, okay. Let me go back to my drawing board and think about some other things. So we have tried to reorganize the teams around DevOps. It has been, in some cases, really, really successful, and in other cases, it's been met with a lot of resistance. Interestingly enough, though, I think that after you get past the resistance stage, like, people spend a lot of energy resisting it, and then they sort of get to the other side of it, and they say, oh, all right, you know what? Maybe this isn't so bad. And so I do think there's value in organizational change. I think there's value in getting people to look at their jobs in a different way. And there's value in getting somebody else to look at how you're doing your job. And maybe they've got some ideas that you haven't considered. But I do think organizational change, and I think organizational change as it relates to DevOps is an important aspect of the whole picture, but I think it's also very difficult for people to achieve within their organizations if it does not come from the very top.
Yeah.
Because
you need a lot of support.
You have got to get buy-in, and you've got to get people's buy-in and that kind of stuff. So I think that, so I think it's a challenge. I think we're still struggling with what exactly does the organization look like so that we can best support what we're trying to achieve.
So I was going to ask you something, Trish, and then jump into Nicole to see whether she has any sort of data or research around this. But I'm curious about whether, Trigg talked about hierarchies and blowing up hierarchies, and I assume you're not getting rid of hierarchies altogether, because we tend to need hierarchies to function. I'm curious whether you feel like your organization, if it was more or less hierarchical, would make it easier or harder to implement some of these things.
Our organization is not super hierarchical, so I don't feel like it's, I don't feel like that's sort of necessarily the issue for us. I personally am not a big fan of hierarchy. I think that people need to feel empowered. I think it's not so important like who do you report to and who does your review. It's more about what kind of work are you doing. Is it interesting and exciting for you? Not everybody sort of likes that model, right? Not everybody feels comfortable working in that environment. But I do feel like you need to give people room to grow. You need to give people room to feel like they could, maybe there's something that interests them and they want to go after it. And maybe it's outside the purview of their immediate position, but I think you have to give them that space, so yeah.
And I'm curious, Nicole, about, we've talked a lot about generative and creative organizations.
Right, so the other part of what DORA does is we offer organizational assessments, and so in that half of my work, we've worked with and engaged with organizations that have several different types of organizational models. And so, you might find yourself in an organization that, like you said, it sort of has to come from the top, right? Like, what if you find yourself in an organization that's like, cool story, we are not reorging, right? Like, either do the DevOps or don't, but like, you are stuck. Don't feel like you're trapped and you can't make this work, right? Like, we have worked with high-performing teams and high-performing organizations that are doing the Spotify thing, right? That are like organized in squads and teams and tribes. We've worked with organizations that are like at the far end of the side, or like far end of the organizational kind of dichotomy where they are like fully functionally siloed, and they find it's going to be more difficult, but they find ways to make it work. And then we've worked with organizations that like are kind of in this hybrid model where they have like sort of cross-functional ish teams, and then they still have this like sort of shared services, federated teams of either like DevOps, they call them DevOps teams, but it's usually like an enablement team, IT ops teams. And they're still, I don't want to say they're still finding ways. Yeah, they're finding ways and they're making it work, and they are churning out value really, really fast and in really, really strong ways. And organizational change helps, again, because it breaks up politics if that's a dysfunction for your team. But if it is not a dysfunction for your team, don't worry about it, because there is so much value in sorry, I have a PhD, so like sometimes I fall back in this like academia land, what we call invisible work. And that's the people that like sometimes under traditional measures of performance, these people like tank. It looks like they're doing nothing is happening, and yet when they quit or when they leave or when they go on vacation, nothing happens. Which is why we strongly suggest that when you evaluate performance, you do it at the team level, because individuals don't make software, teams do, right? Like, these are the people that are the glue for the teams. They know what's happening, everything's going on, and sometimes these are the things, like, these are like, when like you have this team that's totally high functioning, and like there's the person that like sometimes you feel like this person isn't doing anything, and you're like, no, for some reason when this person's around, this team is churning out work. That comes with a team that's working really, really, really well together. And it comes along I see this along, to like finally like roll this back around, I see this work along all different types of organizational designs.
There's similar research I've read around in science laboratories. There's the person who it's difficult to measure on the basis of outcome of experiments,
yep.
But everyone else's productivity goes up when they're in the room, and it's the invisible work that they're kind of doing. What was the one I was definitely going to ask? So to sort of kick off, I guess, the last 15 minutes, what would you go back and tell yourself if you were starting this whole sort of journey again of trying to transform your organization? Like, what are the sort of couple of things you wish you could get a time machine, go back and tell yourself, either don't worry about these things or totally you should be doing this instead of all this other stuff?
Yeah. I think the first thing would be I would not have told my boss that we were going to get it all done in a year.
Yeah.
That would be the first thing that I would do differently. But it was almost like if I didn't tell him it was going to be done in a year, he wasn't going to let me do it.
Yeah.
So
you should have at least knowingly lied.
Yeah, I should have been more aware of the fallacy of what I was saying. So I think that's the first thing, and I think that maybe sort of trying to, what we did when we sort of started this whole journey was we went very deep in one area. I think that I would have expanded the scope a little bit more, so that, still go deep, but also go a little bit broader throughout the organization from the very beginning. And I think that if you go a little bit broader, you end up in the same time frame, getting a little bit farther along and getting more people on board.
Cool. Trigg?
So I would have 1 to N level things to add, but because there's a probably list. I think there's one of them. I think is the same one, which is don't promise to get it done really quickly, and don't tell people it's going to be easy and there's going to be a huge return on investment. I think, and maybe more importantly, is I would have tried much harder to change the conversation about cost savings and make it about value add, right? Because you're not, the reality is you're not going to save a lot of money, probably, right? You're going to be able to generate value a lot faster and with the same amount of money that you're spending today, especially if you're in a large organization that does these kind of huge annual budgeting cycles, right? You're not going to magically make servers cheaper on day one, but you're going to find that you can be much more efficient with the people. You're going to have to hire fewer people. Your turnover is going to be lower, and you're going to deliver products at a much higher rate, probably more so than you could believe. I think that, I don't have the exact numbers at the tip of my fingertips, but we've done, I want to say close to 70% more software releases a year after the journey that we did when we started it, right? Just tremendous amounts of productivity have gone up, and we're not necessarily spending less overall on technology. We might even be spending a little bit more, but our ability to bring value from that work is much greater.
Nicole, what about you? Looking at the people you consult with, what would you change now? What would you go back and change or add to your arsenal?
I would definitely double down on that, right? So I had always sort of couched don't focus on cost savings, really kind of tip that conversation into value creation. But I had sort of couched it. I would definitely lead with that, because cost savings, if you get those, you only get credit for that the first year. Right? Because if you can save those costs, you get credit for it once, and then it's gone forever, right? You don't get credit for that again.
It's
not
just
like
the new baseline.
Yeah, that's your new baseline.
Right.
It's not like, oh, good job, you saved $1 million last year. I'm going to put that again on your performance report in year 2, in year 3, in year 4. No, that's gone forever. But value savings are additive, right? If you can deliver features and those bring in revenue, they keep bringing in revenue, and they continue to bring in revenue. Particularly for doing it off of the same or only slightly increased cost base. And that's a huge conversation that I don't think is leveraged quite enough or really effectively, particularly coming out of technology, right? The 80s and 90s, IT was a cost center, right? It was never seen as an investment. And the fact that IT is an investment, if we're delivering value, that's huge. That's a big conversation turn. And so I think I would have started leveraging and forwarding that conversation a lot earlier.
So what do you do? And I want to get you two to role play this, pretending you were consultants after I asked Nicole. When you have someone bring you in and go, look, we totally want to do DevOps, and their heart's generally in the right place, but they're like, I've got to reduce costs by 10%, 20%. And they're coming at it from that mindset.
Yep.
How do you even sort of change that conversation? Or do you just go with it?
Oh, sure. So I will ROI white paper. So I actually wrote up a white paper to help people talk through this, right? And so I will have that conversation. I will say, awesome. Okay, where do we have this goal coming from? And it's often handed to them from somewhere else. And then I will say, okay, why do we have this goal? Is this a hard limit? Do we have any other revenue goals? Where is this coming from? What else can we do? Okay, if we have this goal, is this going to be an ongoing goal? Is there something else that this is coming from? Is there anything else that we need to deliver for the company? Do we realize if we cut costs that you're never going to get credit for this again? Can we instead take this cost, can we turn cost savings instead of cutting costs? Can we take cost savings? Can we take headcount, instead of headcount reduction, can we take automation savings and spin these into hours reinvested into either one of two things. Reinvestment back into the business for additional automation, and then list out several different types of automation that we know are important. Test automation, change process efficiencies, configuration management automation, and they usually have like a giant list. They're like, this is amazing, there are so many things we need to do. Or there's another category, which is value creation, delivering features for customers, something that's like explicitly revenue driving, and then split that in half. And then say, okay, do you have headcount dollars? Are you recruiting right now? How difficult is it for you to recruit? And then point out that people that you currently have, if we can take the cost savings and not have to recruit, not have to spend money recruiting, the people that you currently have in-house already know, they're already likely a culture fit, they already know your code base, they already know your infrastructure, they already know all of these other things, and then you don't have to spend hours, like man hours, recruiting, you don't have to spend recruiters' fees, you don't have to spend all of this other stuff, and we can sketch that out. And then they can take that out, like back to someone else and present a business case.
What about when you're inside an organization? So Trish, like you know, your boss comes to you and just goes, your budget's got it, you've got to cut the whole thing by 15% and do more faster. Like,
it's so funny because I just had this conversation. It really wasn't that long ago, and I said to my boss, I really need to hire like 5 people next year. And he said, or you could just do things slower. And I was like, or, yeah, sure, that could happen, but it never would, of course. And the expectation is that you're going to do it faster and faster, year over year. But I think that's the whole like value proposition of automation, right? Is that it's not that you're, and I think you're absolutely right. It's not that you're going to save money in the like short term. It's that you're going to spend less money in the future. So it's like you're making an investment, right? So that you don't have to have as many people on your staff. You don't have to, you can do more with fewer people. And I think you also have people who are operating at a much higher level, right? So you keep all your high functioning people, right? Like on our team, we really don't have any junior guys, like, because everybody's sort of operating at a pretty high level, and that's where I want to keep it. I'm not really interested in training people so much as having everybody on the teams, materially contributing to what's going on. So.
Or training your already high functioning people to be like even more amazing people.
Or training them to move out in different directions, right?
Yes.
Like this whole T-shaped skill set concept, right? Like helping them to move into other areas where they might not have the kind of expertise that they want.
I think, and I've spoken quite a bit about this already, right? I think that, certainly cost avoidance is huge, right? So the ability to say, look, I can look at the data, right? I can tell you what my growth has been, what my cost growth has been over the past 2-3 years, right? And I can tell you what a percentage of our net profit is, right? And if I can change that ratio, right? If I can get us making more money with the same amount of money that we're spending, then that should be good enough, right? That's again, we often talk about cost as though it's the only number that's part of the expense report, right? There's profitability, and if you can increase profitability, if you can show how this particular journey will help your customer deliver value faster, right, or help your business partner deliver value faster, and turn that into revenue, then that's a pretty strong argument.
I think the other thing that automation really helps us do is waste avoidance, right? Which is another way that we can really help like swap those ratios.
So we've got a couple of minutes left. Just check quickly if there's anyone in the crowd who wanted to ask a question. Okay, I have a really quick one, which might be dangerous coming from a software vendor at a software conference. So I'd like to preface it with, you should all deploy Puppet everywhere. How much do you think it actually matters to have the same tools consistently deployed across the organization?
We've been having this conversation a lot, actually, because we've been acquiring a lot of different companies, and all got their own tool sets, and and initially I thought, well, maybe it doesn't matter that much. Maybe we should just kind of let some of these sleeping dogs lie. But the reality is that, and I spoke to some of my team about it. They were like, no, we have got to standardize on how we're doing things, and they're right. I mean, I think that if you want to talk about cost avoidance, Get everybody on the same platform. Get everybody using the same tools. Get their skills, aligned across businesses. Because otherwise, you're going to end up. So you're going to be disjointed. You're going to be spending money, with the right hand, and the left hand doesn't know what to do with that money, sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I think you have to have some flexibility, and I think a lot of it depends on how your company runs, right? So if you have a very centralized organization where a small group of people have to manage all the tools, minimizing the number of tools they're supporting is definitely a great thing, right? And I'll bring back Spotify because I think it's interesting that they have kind of a bring whatever tool you want to work policy, right? But they also enable their teams to self-support, right? And so you have these kind of organically forming support teams and kind of a very open source model on how things run. Most companies don't operate that way. The reality is that most companies, they centralize where they can. They create COEs, they create engineering teams. They try to minimize the person footprint managing a specific tool. So I think if you're part of one of those organizations, yeah, it absolutely makes sense to try to reduce that out there, right? But there's also, I think, and this is maybe a calculated cost, is to say, I've got to let people have a chance to experiment and to innovate and to try new things out, right? So if I say, let me just allocate a specific percentage of my time or my budget to say, yeah, go download stuff, go figure it out. Let me create a safe space for you to try out new tools, and I'm willing to listen if a tool can be proven to be better, right? If you can bring in something that's gonna improve profitability or the general level of happiness of our developers, then that's a positive thing. So
it's difficult to balance though. Like, I feel
tough.
this quite viscerally until I think a year or so ago I was CIO at Puppet, and we were only a 400-person company. And suddenly I had the IT budget of everyone's software spend for tools. Right. And we did an audit, and we had 7 different video conferencing products we paid for. And it was ridiculous. Yeah. And so trying to balance that, how do you give people the space to innovate and experiment? Because otherwise you're always going to be on the same tool chain.
Yeah.
And nothing's ever going to get better. But at the same time, these things cost money, and there's friction and communication and all of those things.
Yeah.
So, it's a balance, right? It's definitely a balance. There are some things to be gained by standardization. But data shows it's a drinking game when I'm around. Research shows. Data shows that software delivery performance improves when you empower your teams to make their own choice. Within reason, within balance. Trust your engineers to make the right decision, right? So again, right, there's some model in there, there's some balance in there that makes sense. We are not all Google, but Google has this really interesting model where when you develop within their known standard of things, right, then they provide the structure, they provide the support for the thing. If you, as a developer, and your development team decide that you need to develop a core something outside of that, then you are responsible for supporting that. And that is a decision that you have made, and then you do the thing. And if other teams decide to do that thing, then maybe the core teams, the core support teams decide to support that. If something goes and sets itself on fire, then you support it. If you decide to back yourself out of it, then that's fine and that's a thing. But we see better performance when teams are trusted because they are the experts. Let's be real, we are not. When by the time we get up into leadership, right, we tend to differently estimate things. Trust them to do that. Again, though, it is a balance because when you have, especially video conferencing, when is that a thing? 7 things.
7 expensive things.
7 expensive things.
So I think with that note on trust is a good one to end on because the timer is saying we're actually out of time. I think that's a good, you've got to trust up and trust down, I think, ultimately.
For sure.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to the panel.
Thank you.